Now, the Liberal Democrats have pledged to spend £1 billion a year repairing NHS hospitals if they win the election. But the NHS Confederation, which represents health services, said £1 billion will barely scratch the surface.
We can speak now to Liberal Democrats. Munira Wilson, good morning. Thank you for joining us here on BBC Breakfast today. So, £1 billion to fix crumbling hospitals, you described them as. What kind of difference would our viewers see in their local hospital from that £1 billion?
Well, what we've seen over recent years is a backlog of some £12 billion of repairs that have built up in hospitals up and down the country. So many local hospitals are struggling with floods and leaks, such as Stepping Hill Hospital in Stockport or St Helier down in Sutton in southwest London. And the problem is that that's putting patient safety and operations and other treatments at risk, as well as staff at risk. So what Liberal Democrats are saying is we need a 10-year plan, starting with £1 billion each year in the next Parliament to start to tackle that repair backlog and actually fix our crumbling hospitals so that we're not putting patients and NHS staff at risk every day.
So £1 billion to start with, but how much beyond that? Because we've got figures from NHS Digital this morning who say that the NHS in England alone needs about £12 billion to repair hospitals and buildings.
Yes, so it is a £12 billion backlog. So we've said we think this can be probably cleared in about 10 years, £1 billion each year in the first Parliament, and we would hope to see that by the end of that first Parliament, the economy would be in a better state, given the plans that Liberal Democrats have set out for economic growth and better finances for the British economy, so that we can invest a bit more in that second Parliament to get to that £12 billion. So it's the start of a 10-year plan to fix that £12 billion backlog. And some figures we've released today as well show that hospitals that are full of that rack concrete, that aero concrete that can crumble easily, that we know is really unsafe, we've seen in both our schools and our hospitals, that if you look at the 7 hospitals in the country that are most affected by rack, by 2030 there'll be some 4 million patients going through those hospitals. We need to urgently start to fix some of those issues.
OK, but on this money then, so it's £1 billion a year, every year for 10 years, that equals £10 billion.
Yes.
Not £12 billion that you say is needed, so there would still be extra money needed, and then I guess you've got inflation and extra repairs, more buildings needed to be done. So it's still going to be short.
Yeah, well, that's why we say by the end of the first Parliament, hopefully we'll be in a position to review and increase that over the following 5 years. But this is a start. This is more ambitious than what we've seen from any of the other parties when we've got crumbling NHS hospitals across the country. Look, the Liberal Democrats have set out a plan of a fully costed £9 billion plan for our health and care system. And it's really important that if we want to start getting those waiting lists down, that we're not seeing units like outpatient units. I mentioned Stepping Hill Hospital, they had to demolish an entire outpatient unit. Their intensive care unit was flooded. That impacts ultimately day-to-day patient appointments and operations. And if we want to start clearing that backlog, get our economy moving again, then we've got to focus on fixing our health and care system, and that includes the buildings. OK, you say you have a plan. The Institute for Fiscal Studies have looked at your plan, your tax-raising plans, and they are not convinced, aren't they? They're saying that some of your ideas, like taxing share buybacks, are not necessarily good for the economy. So how do you convince those economists, how do you convince all of us that you've got the right plan? Well, the share buyback plan, I believe that's something that's been used in the US, and I think we have been conservative in our estimates in terms of how much that would raise, so that we're not overestimating how much could be raised through that. We've also talked about reforming capital gains tax, so that actually the vast majority of people who pay capital gains tax on fairly modest gains would actually see a decrease in tax, but those wealthy millionaires and billionaires who actually get away with paying very little in capital gains tax on massive gains every year would pay a bit more. We've talked about closing the loopholes in the windfall tax for oil and gas giants who've made billions out of the energy crisis, and we know that there are real loopholes in that tax at the moment. So we've set out a series of taxes, unlike again the other parties, to show how we're going to invest in our health and care system and in our schools and other parts of our public services, which are on their knees after this Conservative government has trashed the economy and put taxes at a 70-year high on working families up and down the country, and public services in a mess. Some
people, though, think that the problems with public services date back to the austerity years when, of course, you as Liberal Democrats were in government in coalition with the Conservatives. And back then you were promising a big £55 billion package, I think it was, to repair hospitals, and then that was scrapped. So how can people believe you that in 2024 your plans to rebuild hospitals would ever come to anything?
Look, when Liberal Democrats were in government, we fought the Conservatives every day. We had to make some tough decisions, but day-to-day spending on the NHS was protected, as was the schools budget. We raised millions out of paying income tax altogether. It was the Liberal Democrats who insisted that we raise tax thresholds, something that the Conservative government has frozen.
But that building and repair budget was scrapped.
Well, no, there was still maintenance and capital investment going on in our NHS at the time, but there were difficult decisions made. The Conservatives have had 9 years in government since, and it's only been in the last few years that the scandal of RAC has been exposed, and they have done absolutely nothing about it, whether that's in our hospitals or in our schools, and that's why we are setting out now an urgent plan to start tackling those repairs.
Munira Wilson from the Lib Dems, thank you for joining us.